hunting through the viewfinder of my camera the first time I saw a soccer game in action. Like many of us, I grew up watching sports. Only when I say watching, what I truly mean is staring blankly at the blurry figures moving before me. I heard the players kicking the ball, the pitter-patter of their cleats on the field, the bleachers creaking beneath me. I cheered when I heard cheering. I sighed when I heard disappointment. Sometimes at the wrong times, though, which was always awkward. My name is Samantha Hurley, and I'm a legally blind photojournalist and storyteller. My work has appeared in the Associated Press, The Guardian, and the New York Times. But it's this incredible oxymoron, a blind photojournalist, because most people hear blindness and assume complete darkness, when truly about 85% of legally blind people have some remaining vision. And a lot of my experience with blindness is pretending to understand what others are reacting to, what they're pointing at, pretending to empathize with the visual world around me. But through photojournalism, I can use the camera to connect with the visual complexity of things I've merely looked at my entire life. I was born with albinism, a recessive genetic condition characterized by a lack of pigment, also known as melanin. It affects roughly 1 in 20,000 people worldwide, but this complete lack of pigment is also why I have fair skin, light eyes, and light hair. If you're trying to think of a famous person with albinism, there's not a whole lot of representation. But for a while, I was claiming Elsa from Frozen. Yo, I mean, she's super blonde. But it turns out she's just blonde, not blind. And I don't have magical ice powers. I just can't see. Bummer. This is because the eye's retina requires pigment to process light. Without it, my eyes are like a camera with a faulty sensor. Without pigment to process out this extra visual information, things start to look like this. What you're seeing here is called photophobia, or the eye's extreme sensitivity to light. This abundance of visual information also prohibits my eyes from focusing properly on things, which is called nystagmus, a condition where the eyes make rapid, repetitive, and uncontrolled movements. So, for obvious reasons, I can't drive. I was never the first pick for the dodgeball team. In a grocery store full of signs and things to read is my living nightmare. In short, if my eyes were the camera, the image would often come out blurry and overexposed. So when I first picked up the camera, it gave me the tools to explain this. It gave me the words to explain my vision and explore how I see. It acted as my bridge to understanding the sighted world. I can use telephoto lenses to see things that are far away, and macro lenses for those close-up details. But still, it's ironic, right? A blind photojournalist? I mean, it mixes like oil and water in people's minds. So allow me to explain. My journey with photography began when I got my first cell phone. I was 11, and when I wasn't using it to play Candy Crush, I was taking photos of things I had trouble seeing. Anytime something was too small or too far away, I snapped a picture of it, and there it was in the palm of my hand. My camera roll began as a collection of things I had trouble seeing. The whiteboard in school, pages from a history textbook, restaurant menus. But soon, my camera roll grew and evolved into a scrapbook of details that fascinated me. Facets of the visual world I didn't want to take for granted. So it turns out I feel most at home when on this quest for visual details. Nowadays, that can look like breaking news coverage on campus or checking if my sour cream is expired. But still, I never anticipated a career in photojournalism was in the cards for me. For most blind people, we're told so many things aren't in the cards that it's hard to imagine what is. My dad always joked, "You can do anything except be a fighter pilot." But at this point, the camera was a tool and a hobby. But as a profession, I had trouble seeing it. Yeah, y'all caught up. So when I started at university 4 years ago, I chose to major in journalism. I took classes in reporting, storytelling, fact-checking, but on a whim. I also took a class in photojournalism. And the professor told me something kind of cool. She said I was good at it. But this surprised me because for most people, the word blind is this shorthand for not knowing. Think of it. Going in blindly, blind faith, blind spot. A large part of my reality is this synonym for ill-preparedness or chance, when everything about the way in which I interact with the world is actually incredibly, almost painstakingly intentional. Crossing a street, filling in a form, going to college, applying to jobs. So what if she was onto something? What if my professor was right? That this intentionality I've developed because of my blindness reveals the power within my unique perspective, even in, but especially in photojournalism. So growing up, in the process of adapting to things that were hard for me, I developed these routines or strategies, what I now jokingly like to call my blind skills. Because of my albinism, light and I have a love-hate relationship, a constant push and pull between too much and too little, because light can drastically change how I see. Good light is even and soft, while bad light might be fluorescence or overheads, or lots of light harshly coming from one direction. Because just as light can make or break a photo, it can make or break how I see. I mean, the definition of photography is quite literally the capturing of light to create an image. And since, like life, photojournalism doesn't occur in a studio, it's about adapting to the light that you've available to you. And because of my sensitivity to it, it's the first thing I notice when I walk into a room. Like in this photo, where I waited for the perfect moment for church service to end and the sun to pass through the clouds so I could isolate that soft light from the stained glass window and illuminate her beautiful face. Another blind skill I've developed is room mapping. When I walk into a room and can't see what's on the other side of it, not only is that a little bit scary, but naturally I'm going to be curious about what's going on around me. So when I enter a new space, I walk the perimeter. I map out key details like important people, exits, bathrooms. This way, if I can't see what's 20 feet away from me, at least I have a general idea. Similarly, in reporting, we're taught to catalog all of the environmental details, because when you're on assignment, you never know what's going to come next. So mapping out a plan is key. Needless to say, I get all my steps in and find unique angles such as this one in the process. So now we know that to feel grounded in a setting, not only do I have to walk it, but I have to ask a lot of questions because I know what happens when I don't. My life is filled to the brim with these fantastic stories of awkwardly walking into the men's restroom, yeah, or very confidently calling a random dark-haired man my dad. And that's the sort of thing that only gets weirder the older I get. Yeah. So I've learned to ask for the details I can't see. And this habit not only allows me to navigate a space, but it leads me to stories I might not otherwise find. Because when you ask someone a question, while it can be extremely humbling, the worst thing they can say is no. But the best thing they can say is, yeah, of course. How can I help? And that's how this photo was made. When an email with the subject line, possibly fun idea, led me into documenting a day in the life of my mayor. And when I asked if I could join him and his family for Friday night tacos, to my surprise, he said yes and invited me into his living room. For a while, though, I never considered these blind skills could be just that, skills. In fact, the idea that I could conjure something useful out of my blindness was this completely novel idea to me. And perhaps that's because so much of my praise spoke to my ability to seem normal. I've been told more times than I can count, wow, I can't take photos like that, and I can see. Or, wow, you can't even tell you have a vision problem in your photos. And the thing is, it wasn't deliberate that my photos were good enough to look like a sighted person had taken them. But it wasn't an accident either. It was hard work. And for a while, I lived for this validation. I rode the high, saying thank you, not realizing that what I was being rewarded for was camouflaging my blindness. that my blindness was seen as this obstacle to overcome. So when I looked around me at my peers, my professors, my colleagues, I couldn't find a single person like myself, a blind photojournalist. I had no roadmap, no example to point to, and without that example, I didn't have permission to be myself. So I continued to camouflage. When I found out I was anonymously selected to cover the Paralympics for the Associated Press in France, once again, this ability to camouflage was confirmed. I remember walking through the airport, camera equipment in one hand, cane in the other. The mixing of these two identities felt so uncomfortable, so foreign. But when I landed in Paris, and all the signage was huge, and accessibility was the talk of the town, I felt something I had never felt before. I was surrounded by other people with disabilities. But even at the Paralympics, I was still a blind woman in a non-disabled field. I still had to do things differently to produce the same quality of photos. But with the fast pace of things, I didn't have time to sit down and figure out how I'd have to accommodate myself. So I worried that because sometimes I couldn't keep up, that it meant I didn't have what it takes. For a moment, I felt like an imposter, even when through my camera, I was seeing people doing things differently and succeeding. While a runner with a running blade might have a different path to the finish line, they win, just differently. And I watched it through my camera. They do it pretty damn fast. So it was a full circle moment for me. There I was, surrounded by other disabled athletes achieving excellence. People who, like me, were in these spaces once considered impossible or unorthodox to them. And it forced me to realize that my visual perspective, although different, is valid. Because there's no one way of seeing. I would have to look beyond how others see blindness and disability and photojournalism and imagine more for myself and more for my community. And when I found the words to truly call myself a blind photojournalist, I wrote about it in the New York Times, making the decision to write very, very, very publicly about my blindness and my photojournalism felt like splashing cold water onto my face when so much of my success was born out of suppressing my identity. But when I looked in the mirror and thought about the younger version of myself, I knew I had to do it for her, for little blind Sam, desperately looking for permission to belong. Many of us can recall a time when we've been told where we do and don't belong. When onlookers have tried to put us in boxes or assumed how we see. When we fear how they'll react when we break those expectations. But it shouldn't have to be this way. I shouldn't have to stand on the stage to prove that my perspective is valuable, to encourage you to lean into yours. Stories like mine shouldn't be inspirational. They should just be accepted. So let's start by challenging the expectations that we hold for ourselves and for others. Let's look beyond this idea that there's just one way of seeing. Because just as I have experience that informs how I see the world, so do you. Your perspective is your power. Thank you.